Now, turn off all the lights and get ready to never sleep again.
I'm pretty sure my parents knew church is a cult by Jgrupe. I think your parents are in a cult, my friend Todd said to me. It took me by surprise and I tried to pause my game, then remembered it was online and that I couldn't. My character died a moment later. I was so stunned by what he had said I was no longer paying attention. What are you talking about? I asked him, passing him the game controller. We were playing a battle royale game and he was terrible at it, so I knew he would die and it would be my turn again soon. It was late at night and we were sitting in my basement on old couches. A spring poked into my back and foam material poked out of the holes in the coffee-stained armrest. My parents were asleep upstairs, so I wasn't really worried about them overhearing. Still, I kept my voice down. You didn't think that there was anything weird about that church service today? He asked, tapping the controller against his knee. He sat up straight and held the controller more tightly, focused on lasting more than 2 minutes in the game this time. Land on the outskirts, I said. You're going to die immediately if you try to land in one of the popular spots. He waited for a while before dropping into the game, and I thought he might do a bit better this time. That church pastor, man, he's fucking weird. And what were they saying about a 30-day fast? Won't they die if none of them eat for 30 days? Your mom and dad are really going to do that? Todd had been forced to accompany us to church, since that was a condition of the sleepover. I had moved to Grantville with my family a couple of years before, and Todd was my best friend from my old hometown. He came over once in a while, but less and less frequently these days. As much as I had promised myself I wouldn't let it happen, I was losing touch with my old friends. I was hanging out with people I had met at school a lot more lately. It had taken me 2 full years to finally make some friends. I know, that's a long time. Tell me about it. My other friends from Bellwood hardly spoke to me anymore. Todd was the only one I still saw. We had been best friends. It's a juice fast. Yeah, I know it's really weird. They're gonna have broth and soup and stuff too, I guess. But still, no solid food for a month. I really don't get it. I'm just glad I don't have to do it. My parents were probably worried about having children's aid called on them, I thought to myself. They had just said I was exempt because I needed my energy for schoolwork and extracurricular activities. Everybody in that place is so mesmerized by that pastor, too. It's freaky, man, Todd said, focused on the game. I hadn't noticed it before, but I was really accustomed to it. From an outsider's perspective, I guessed it had been a bit strange. Their church had grown over the last couple years and now had a couple hundred members. When we had first started going, it was only a dozen or so of us. We had upgraded to newer and bigger buildings along the way. The people in the church respected the charismatic pastor, Steve, so much they fawned over him constantly and revered him. They regarded him from their pews silently and respectfully and with glowing admiration. Now there were a couple hundred people competing for his attention, and with increasing fervor. If someone even so much as coughed during one of his sermons, they were shushed from 6 different directions and given death glares from dozens of reprimanding eyes. Aside from that, no one ever stopped smiling at church, like a bunch of jokers. Their teeth showed constantly before and after service, to show everyone how happy they were to be there. I hated how fake it felt and refused to keep a phony grin plastered on my face every Sunday. I had gotten several comments about my sour face from smiling parishioners who asked me what was wrong every time they saw me. It was infuriating. The latest iteration of the church had been a huge transformation. A lot of the parishioners were involved in construction trades, so it had been decided a new church would be built on the pastor's land. He lived on a big farm, and there were many acres of land there. Talk had begun about building houses on the land too, where parishioners could move if they so wished, to form a little community. My parents were excited about the prospect, and I was more than a bit annoyed they were talking about moving again. I had just begun to make friends in the city, and now they wanted to move out to the country to live on a subdivided farm owned by the church pastor. I was only 16, though, so what could I really do other than voice my protest and be ignored? Yeah, I know it's kind of weird, I said, a bit self-consciously. Kind of weird? Man, it's fucking bananas in that place. People speaking in tongues and casting demons out of gay people. That guy rolling around on the floor, screaming. What kind of weird shit is that anyways? The more I thought about it, the more embarrassed I became. It was a crazy scene in there. It was a good thing he hadn't come on Rattlesnake Day 2 weekends ago, I thought. I doubted Todd would sleep over on a Saturday again. I took a sip from the sickly sweet lemon vodka cooler we had gotten my brother to buy us at Todd's request. We had successfully managed to hide them from my parents all weekend. Well, I don't know what to do. They said I don't have to go anymore when I turn 18, so it's only another couple of years. What's the worst that could happen? Just don't drink the fucking Kool-Aid, man. That's all I'm saying. He gave me a serious look, and I nodded. It was good advice, and I vowed to follow. 10 months later, I was on the back of a large wagon, hauling bundles of hay and stacking them in neat piles. There was a lot of work to be done in the communal fields. My mom's hair was in disarray, and she had dark circles under her eyes, but her grin was wide and manic. She had sweat stains all over the front of her shirt and under her arms. No doubt I looked the same, minus the smile. The church pastor, Steve, was up front on a tractor. He was driving the tractor which pulled the hay wagon, wearing sunglasses and a ball cap. I noticed his white t-shirt looked clean and dry. He had soundproof headphones on to block out the noise from the tractor, and a little fan was blowing into his face. He looked back at us once in a while and yelled directions while we swatted at horseflies, sweating and grunting and pulling bales of hay up from the ground. The friendly grin never left his face, and everyone followed his commands without question. The group just continued nodding and smiling regardless of how exhausted they all were. This was day 3 of our collective effort to bundle hay for the property so that it could be used to feed the communal livestock. There had been lots of projects like this lately, and I was always voluntold to help. I barely had time for homework anymore, but there was talk of a homeschooling program starting soon, with all the kids from church to be taught by Steve, the pastor. He had a diploma from a teacher's college, so it was only a matter of sorting out the legal paperwork. By next September, we would all be his students, and not just on Sundays. A horsefly took a big chunk out of the back of my leg, behind my knee, and I yelped and swatted it. I lifted my hand and saw a large pool of blood and a squished bug body. One of the pastor's kids, David, saw me and gave me a stern look, furrowing his brow. He wagged his finger at me and told me I shouldn't kill living things, and said he was going to tell his dad. Oh, great, I thought to myself. Anytime I did anything within eyesight of the pastor's 4 kids lately, I was sure to hear about it later, even if it was innocent and I had done nothing wrong. Ironically, they were all hellraisers who did nothing but stir up shit and cause trouble. My friend Todd refused to come over now, since we had moved to the communal farm. He had gotten into a fight with the pastor's son, David, who was about our age. The fight had started because David had thrown a rock at Todd's head, leaving a large goose egg and a laceration. Somehow, Todd had been blamed, according to my parents and the pastor, who had been quite angry with him for some reason. David was unscathed, since he was a foot taller than Todd and knocked him unconscious with one blow to my friend's temple. I visited Todd at his house now, infrequently. My parents refused to drive me there, so it was tough to find a way over. Most days I ended up stranded on the communal farm, and as such was forced to help with the never-ending labor. Our house was still being built, so we lived in a large building with several other families and absolutely no privacy. It was a teenager's worst nightmare. The wagon was full, and I was told to stay behind in the hay fields and wait for them to come back. My brother and I were given vague instructions. Basically, we would be standing around doing nothing, since the hay bales were already tied up and ready to go. I looked at my brother Richard with a confused expression. He was a year older, so was almost free of this insanity. He said he was going to move out of the commune on his 18th birthday. We watched the wagon drive off and sat around for a while, complaining and swatting at flies and mosquitoes. We were both drenched in sweat and couldn't wait to be finished for the day. We usually worked until dinner, then call it quits. But today we had been forced to go back afterwards to work until the sun went down. The expectations on us seemed to be getting greater and greater every day. There was only time for one more wagon load, I realized. The sun would be setting soon. The bugs were becoming more and more ferocious, and I wished I had brought a bottle of bug spray. We sat there waiting for 20 minutes or so, and I was beginning to wonder if they'd forgotten us in the field when my brother grabbed my wrist and exclaimed in shock, "What the hell is that?" He jumped backwards, and I saw his eyes were wide and terrified. He was pointing into the woods. I followed his gaze and looked carefully into the foliage, straining my eyes in the dim light. I saw what looked to be a wolf, sitting in the shadows off the edge of the field. "It's a wolf, I think," I said, my voice trembling. I saw movement to the right and looked to see bushes swaying back from being disturbed as if something had just gone past them. I looked around, suddenly terrified. "There's more of them," my brother said in a whisper. I saw them now too. There were a few more, dotted around us at odd angles, like a hunting party. But wolves don't usually hunt people, I thought. Something was strange about the wolves too. I looked closer, but it was hard to see in the gathering darkness. It was their bodies. They didn't look right. The fur was wrong, patchy and ill-fitting. I realized with alarm that these were not wolves. These were people in wolf clothing. The wolf faces were actually masked. I whispered this to Richard, and he nodded his head, saying he had just noticed the same thing. I said we should run. He agreed. We got up from where we stood and bolted back towards the road. We took a logical shortcut through a patch of trees, and that was our mistake. They had predicted it. I felt the world turn sickeningly upside down, and it took me a moment to realize I was ensnared in a trap. Everything was spinning, and I saw I was hanging in a cargo net that swung from a high branch on a tall tree. It was like a trap from an episode of Scooby-Doo. How embarrassing. I saw that Richard had gotten past the trap somehow and was running back towards the commune. Hopefully he can get back there and call the police, I thought. I screamed after him, telling him to get help. He looked back over his shoulder and kept running, a terrified look on his face. Panic turned to dread when I saw him fall through the facade of leaves covering the pit. He disappeared from view, and I heard him howling in pain a moment later. They had set 2 traps for us, it seemed. Maybe more. "See, Jason, this is why you need to remember not to be a sheep," the familiar voice of Steve, the pastor, called up to me. He lifted up his wolf mask for just a second, revealing his always present smile. Then he replaced the mask. His sermon last week had been all about not following bad examples set by people, even if we respected those people. Richard and I had looked at each other, giggling in our pews. I had looked back up at the altar and seen Steve staring at me. His sermon paused. I had looked around the church and seen the whole congregation had been staring at me, like a bad dream. A dozen others crowded around him, now all in gray fur and wearing wolf masks. They stared at me through the holes in their masks, and I realized they were the actual faces of wolves that had been cut off and turned into face coverings. They regarded me through the mask, and it was surreal and horrifying at the same time. I recognized my mother's eyes through one of the masks. At least I'm pretty sure it was her. She had to have known, at least. I was breathing fast and heavy, trying to make sense of the situation. In the background, I heard my brother yelping and wailing, saying something about the bone, how the bone was sticking through the skin. It was hard to hear him from the bottom of that hole. Eventually, he stopped screaming. No one went to check on him. He was a lost cause. He had no plans of staying after his 18th birthday, did he, Jason? Steve's voice was clear and remorseless. He waited for me to answer, saying nothing. I nodded my head. I was beginning to think that they had no intention of helping him out of that pit. Much to my dismay, several of the wolf parishioners walked toward the hole, pulling shovels out from under piles of leaves, and began to cover the pit with dirt. Richard didn't make a sound from down where he lay at the bottom of the hole. You have two choices. That's the way I see it, Jason. You can be a wolf, or you can be a sheep. Which one do you want to be? He looked up at me, holding a furry gray costume and a wolf mask that had materialized out of nowhere, it seemed. I realized at that moment this wasn't a human being I was looking at. This was something else entirely. There wasn't any clear reason why I should think that, but looking back on it, I don't doubt it for a second. That man in the wolf mask, surrounded by his disciples, he was too convincing, too charismatic and charming. He made me want to do it, but only for a second. All right. I'll be a wolf. Just please let me down. The ropes were cutting into me painfully, and it felt like I couldn't breathe, the way I was tangled and compressed in the net. Steve made a motion with his hands, and I dropped down to the ground. They untied the ropes, and I stood up slowly from the net. It was good to be back on solid ground, and I let my mind adjust to it for a second before what I was about to do. He handed the wolf clothing and mask to me, and I took it. I looked around at them, all staring at me, and said awkwardly, I'm really shy. Just, give me a minute. I'm gonna change. I walked towards a big tree, pretending I was going behind it for a bit of privacy. When I got there, I stepped behind it and threw the disgusting hairy garment to the pine needle-strewn forest floor. I began to run, not towards the commune, but towards the highway. They weren't expecting this, I realized. It had been the dumbest and most impulsive escape plan ever, but it was working. I kept pumping my legs and running, jumping over stumps and fallen trees. The darkness was making it harder to see, but that could also work to my advantage, I realized. I didn't even risk a look behind me, just continued running until I reached a clearing. I ran into the open field and something whizzed past my ear. I felt a sharp pain there a moment later and reached up with my hand. It came away covered in blood. I looked behind me and saw a wolfman with a compound bow raised and an arrow pointed in my direction. I immediately realized it was David, the pastor's son who had beat up my friend. He was an expert with a bow and went hunting all the time. They were always talking about it, but I never participated. Now I realized what they were hunting all these past months. The bratty, spoiled little smile he always wore now seemed even more terrifying. Now that I knew the trophies he'd been bragging about were really human beings, I was suddenly very glad I had turned down the offers for play dates our parents had attempted to implement. I shuddered to think what a play date would be like for such a creature, still not knowing exactly what he was the offspring of. As if on cue, Steve the pastor walked up behind him with his own bow raised. They let their arrows fly simultaneously, and one hit me square in the shoulder. The other caught the side of my neck, grazing it. I looked down in horror at the arrow which protruded from my shoulder, just above my clavicle. It looked like it had gone straight through without hitting a bone, at least. With dawning horror, I realized I was no longer running. I was down on the ground on my hands and knees. I had apparently just passed out for a second or two. I looked back and saw Steve and David closing in on me. I jumped back to my feet and hobbled until I managed to break into a jog, then a run. I kept sprinting through the forest despite my injuries, although my pace slowed as I began to feel faint and tired from blood loss. Branches hit me in the face and sharp sticks cut me as I made my quick and careless way through the brush. The darkness had finally settled upon the forest, and it was impossible to see into the distance. I realized with a wave of relief that I might get away, that the moonless night might aid my escape. I tried not to get too excited as I felt the blood squishing in my shoes like I had been walking through puddles on a rainy day. It dawned on me that no one would want to pick up a blood-soaked man standing at the side of the road with his thumb held out trying to look harmless. If I ran out into the road and waved my arms, screaming bloody murder, that would probably be the safest bet. The highway came into view suddenly as I came out of a thick patch of shrubbery. A pair of headlights came over a rise in the distance, and I saw them coming towards me. I ran in that direction, my heart hammering in my chest, full of fear and hope and adrenaline. When the car was close enough, I ran out into the road and began to wave my bloody arms around, screaming. I don't even know what I was yelling, but they stopped. A pretty girl with glasses and black hair rolled down her window. She appeared to be about my age, and her face was unbelieving and full of shock. I jabbered and rambled and begged her to let me in. I pleaded with her, telling her they were hunting me and that they killed my brother. I heard the sound of the automatic doors unlocking, and she told me to get in. I ran around to the other side and opened the car door. I closed it behind me as I sat down and put on my seatbelt. Someone was saying to drive, 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 and I realized it was me. Her tires spun, and I heard gravel flying as she hit the gas, and we drove away from there, the engine roaring. I saw her hands were gripping at the wheel tightly, and she was looking at me anxiously. "It's all true. Don't worry, I'm telling you the truth," I said. "Look." I pointed to the left side of the road and saw that she noticed them too. Several people in wolf fur and masks emerged from the forest, holding bows and looking around side to side. She noted them without saying a word and continued driving in the direction of the commune, not towards the city, not towards safety. I pointed this out to her. "I know," she said, and looked at me, smiling a wolfish grin. "I'm very well aware of that, Jason." Greetings, spoils and ghouls. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. If you have a request or suggestion, make sure to leave them in the comment section below. We hope you enjoyed this video, and remember to stay spooky.